Uh, Lots of things works. Since the last show 2 weeks ago, had a lot of conferences, presentations, and also training to senior leaders in different sectors, truly advancing the issues that we talk about regarding equity, diversity, and inclusivity, and always sharing African Black wisdom, African Black philosophy, because and I mean we're going to talk about some important topics. We
Absolutely.
always talk about important topics, of
Yes,
course,
true.
but always important to bring that Black angle, that Pan-Africanist angle, in terms of the realities and the lived experiences of Black people worldwide. So thanks for having me, as always.
My pleasure, and I hope the party doesn't get too loud downstairs.
Well, the kids are having fun. Sister Ketsia Peters is here with her children, and
Yes.
they're having fun with our daughter. Yes, that's
Wonderful.
great.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Also with us today, Ryan Knight of the African Canadian Business Network, and also my co-host Monday and Friday mornings, 9 a.m. on the Morning Vibe. What is going on, Ryan?
Things are good. Pleasure to be here, gentlemen. Always you, Dr. Vibe. Looking forward to Monday. This weekend has been quite relaxing, but we also did game night, ACBN's first ever game night. So for those that don't know, the cash flow game created by the guy Robert Kiyosaki,
yes,
that wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad. So it was cool to just get a few people in the community together and play a game and change our mindset around how we deal with money and think about money. So that was cool.
Cool. Well, good to have you on. Good to have you on as always. Got to give a big shout out today before we go any further to Mob Seafood. For those who live in the
G. Eating on the air.
No, not doing that. No, yes. I want to give them a big shout out. A great food truck service in the GTA. They do fantastic stuff. So I'm gonna give them a plug. I went by there today because they're hanging out today or in the next few weekends near where I live. So I went there in support, and I asked, what should I eat? What do you recommend? And the lady, is it Monique, who runs Mob Seafood, had a younger member of the crew there. So I said, okay, I asked the young girl, what should I eat? She goes, I like the shrimp poutine. I don't usually eat poutine, but it was good. It was so good. So I told them if I enjoyed it or if I didn't enjoy it, I push it out here. So I'm keeping to my promise, but it gets a thumbs up. Not something I'd eat on the regular because I'd look like this. I'd be like this wide if I had poutine on a regular basis.
They'll give you two screens.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I got two screens in front of me, but I don't want to take up two screens, right? So let's get to our conversation topics today, and looking forward. And we're going to start off our first conversation. And Cesar, we want you to lead this because you brought it to the digital platform. Purple Day. You're wearing a purple shirt. Tell us the significance and the background of Purple Day.
Thank you so much for bringing this important topic. So October, we are in November, but October is Child Abuse Awareness Month. But of course, we do understand, just like Black History Month in February, Black History is every day. Child abuse, in terms of perpetration, but as well awareness and prevention, must be every day. This great initiative that really comes in the Canadian context, notably in light of the abuse of so many Indigenous children. So when we talk about, some people, and notably media, talking about the discovery of unmarked graves, that is a fallacy. It is not a discovery. It has been known for a long time. Indigenous people have been talking about it for a long time. It just happened right now, notably, yes, we have to say it with media, that the rediscovery of the public conversation about them is bringing a greater awareness regarding the topic of abuse towards children. And when we talk about abuse towards children, too often, who tends to be forgotten out of the conversation? Our children, our Black children. It's too easy to think in terms of abuse of our Black children in terms of the school system, and notably the school to prison pipeline, where too many of our teenagers end up in jail. For information, as we live in a Western country, Canada, another Western country called Australia is a leading country in the incarceration of children in the age of 9 and 10 year olds. And who do those children tend to be? Aborigine slash Black Indigenous children, Australia. So I think it's very important that we do have this conversation. We do bring that awareness and prevention because, and I say this, of course, with all my Pan Africanist love to all my Black brothers and sisters, all our Black families. However, we cannot always look and point the finger at the system nor at the mean or evil white people because that is a lie. The abuse of Black children too often, more often than not, start in our Black families. It starts in the families of too many Black parents who are carrying the scars of their own education by parents who are still marked by the scars of slavery, colonization, and systemic racism. The logic of tough love that we have in too many of our Black families leads to too often discipline that comes with a belt. That is a problem. I understand. And I'm not saying this because I'm a new father and here I am becoming sensitive. No, it's abuse. It's abuse that from healing our children, this is not about raising them white. No, it becomes abuse. There are other ways of discipline. There are other ways to notably pass on that affection with our children so that they don't become scarred. And when I say scarred, I don't just mean in terms of like scars on the skin. I don't even just mean in terms of something that we see too often in our Black communities, aka hyper emotivity, impulsivity. I mean lack of trust. Lack of trust in terms of one another. Lack of trust in terms of even something as remotely as we don't often think of as Black people mean mugging one another on the street because too often we grew up in households of survival. Socioeconomic survival, yes, but emotional and psycho-emotional and affection survival where abuse becomes visible, but it's too often invisible and it scars our children. I put a link. I hope our brother Luke of BI Media is going to put the link, but it's important to understand that when we see the negative statistics, so very purposefully, I put an American link just because it's easier to find, but these are true whether we look at the US, Canada, Brazil, France, the UK, and Australia. The abuse that go on in too many Black homes tend to be hidden under the system. The abuse from the white and Arab, by the way, white and Arab systemic racist system, but also under religion, also under, we know this too often, and notably in Black families. When a child tends to misbehave, we tend to think of the devil, the Satan, the demon, and we tend to hit that child to be harder. When a child would tend to manifest what some people will call gay tendencies or lesbian tendencies, or these type of corrective methods that just propagate hatred, that propagate pain, that propagate the very fact of why we wonder later that we have so many Black adults, men and women, will tend to be failures in communication, failures in empathy towards our own. You will see very often Black people be very understanding towards the white person, the white Latino, give excuses to other communities, but be extremely harsh towards our own. That's bad. But also the abuse in terms of alcohol consumption, recreational and hard drugs in our communities, self-harm, a taboo topic in our Black community, suicide. People don't just accidentally commit suicide. No. People don't wake up one day desiring to see whether there really is a heaven or, why Jesus after they kill themselves. No, years of abuse, the depression, the anxiety that becomes so much linked to the psycho-emotional pressures of surviving in a society of systemic racism that too often parents, black parents and black adults, throw towards children that too often are unprotected. And it's important to remember this. It's not talked enough on the news. When there's a white child goes missing, we hear about it to no end. So many black children go missing. So many black children are killed. And as I'm saying that, and allow me to finish here because I want to make sure my brother and you, Dr. Vibe, get to speak on this. Let us remember what just happened. Actually, on October 27th, the arrest that happened in Texas. A white male and his black girlfriend were arrested because they beat to death one of the black children in the house a year before, and they left the child body rot in the house. And they let the three other kids starve and fend for themselves to the point where the oldest was begging for food to neighbors until he could no longer, and he called 911. This is not a horror story on Netflix. This is not some Stephen King book. Yes, it is extreme, but behind that extreme example, there are too many abuses that go on, and too many of our black children, just as indigenous children, but they're getting the spotlight. Too many of our black children that are abused in silence, and too often we shove it under the rug in the name of survival, making them tougher, resilience, and no, we create broken adults. As our great leader Frederick Douglass said in the 19th century, it is easier to repair children. It is easier to shape children than to repair broken adults. Allow me to leave it there for now.
Ryan?
Because as I'm listening, I start to think none of this is new. So in between, I mean, even before we came on, you had talked about you had been to different conferences, and there's a lot of talk about this topic. And I wanted to ask you, like, out of what you've been seeing, what specifically is missing? Like at these conferences, what commitments are made that would make you feel like we're on the right path, and what is missing that would start to curb some of these statistics that we're seeing coming out over and over again?
I think I don't want to necessarily say what is missing, but I think it comes a lot from us. We have a sense of shame and taboo in not wanting to speak out publicly of our issues, but expect that it will be solved by someone else, or solved in the church or in the mosque, or that basically we can just pray it away, hope it away, etc. So too often one of the things that happens, so to give an example regarding mental health, too often what happens is that we tend to push the issue until it blows up. Whether it be Ray Ray or Keisha, they're suffering. We know they're suffering, but too often what do? We laugh, we make jokes, we basically, think it's gonna go away. It's a summer thing, it's growing up thing, it's this and that and that and that. And yet the behavior of one of our own children, but also adults, if you are honest, is very indicative that there's something wrong going on in that child, in that young adult, in that full adult life. And sometimes I read a great expression on Facebook this week. I'd rather take the time to listen to your story than to attend your funeral. It's very important. And when I say funeral, I'm not just thinking in terms of suicide. As Black people, it's easy to point to white people and talk about school shooting and serial killers. But as Black people, even our teenagers, our young adults will go into gangs and commit murders in Toronto, Montreal, and we know there are gang stories, Ottawa, but as well in the States. They tend to come from broken homes that have created broken children will become broken adults. This is abuse. They
Then,
go for abuse.
yeah, this is where I'd want to push back a little bit, because at the beginning you said you don't feel like anything's missing, but as you were talking, you mentioned we're pushing stuff to the side. We need to talk through what we're working on. There's always a saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yes.
But when things are going wrong, who do we talk to? Like, we don't have a plan as a Black community to say, this child, whenever a child is born, we must create a plan around that child to say, we want to guarantee this child's success. So that's what I would say is missing, is that we don't have a community plan. So all parents, we're just winging it. It's like we wing it in our own way. We're running our household as best we can. Dr. Vibe always talks about the three things: the trauma, repetition, and symbolism.
Yes.
But dealing with trauma, we are just doing that repetitive conferences, talking about what's happening. We can research it to death. There's PhDs given out just talking about social issues and child abuse. But in the article or the link that you had put up, one of the main issues is the child side. What is it? Like in Canada, it'd be CAS, but Child Protective Services in the US, they're contributing almost 30% of the abuse. So when I look at that statistic, I would say, okay, why are we having to rely on a certain system? We don't in our community have the infrastructure. And a lot of these people that are paid very well to work on social issues have not left us with any infrastructure to actually deal with the problem. Do we have our own first response for like child issues? We should have our own Black-run CAS, so that if a parent's having issues, we don't have to go to the traditional one that is flawed in a lot of ways. Our sister Janelle Scarrett just got hired to the York CAS, and we're hoping that that allows it to get on the right path. But really still, she's locked up in their system. And now she has to figure out from the inside how to adjust it. And that's going to be a tall tale. And as community organizations, we have to support her as best we can. But even better, if we had the resources to now put together our own CAS and hire her, so that parents, when something's going wrong, we can now look to our own system, whatever we build, and say, you know what, I'm struggling. Is there something that can be done? And then I feel like it would have a better outcome than what we have. And again, I'm just like spitballing, but I feel like we don't have any infrastructure.
Brother Ryan, you are 100% right, and I'm gonna admit it to you. You actually read between the lines and you went further, because you actually exposed what I didn't want to mention. I did not want to talk about the CASs because it's a system, and I'm a director in child welfare.
Right.
And I didn't want to mention it because it is part of a system that, too unfortunately, in terms of statistics, the disproportionalities and the disparities do prove the ongoing legacy of abuse towards Indigenous and Black children.
Right.
I didn't want to mention Sister Janelle in terms of, yes, congratulations to her for becoming the first Black woman executive director of a CAS, but I didn't want to mention it. Why? Because to put on her the pressure of success, because notably she's Black, when that same agency was in the Toronto Star and others due to so many failures. That's why I was trying to say that we already have everything there, but are we willing to really look into what we already have? And you said it takes a village. The village is there, but are people willing to look at the village? Are people, so if I give an example, as we are here right now on the show, we should be having 200, 300, 1,000, 10,000 Black people listening, having it in the mind that Dr. Vibe is a show for us. Black Canada Talking addresses our issues. Where are the hundreds and thousands of Black people listening now? As if we were of the Jewish community, a very minority in some country where we know there's anti-Semitism, we would have a show with 10,000 or 20,000 plus Jewish viewers listening to get tips in terms of how can we become a stronger community and have more solidarity to help one another. At the same time, I wish Brother Warren was here, because Brother Warren actually addresses this issue in terms of bringing together Black male together in terms of like his barbershop talk series.
Yep.
But at the same time, we have our sisters. We have our sisters like Al Jones doing great work in Nova Scotia. But to what extent are people going to reach out to them, reach out to you, reach out to me, to all of us to say, I mean, I'm saying this. It's my wife who basically was telling me about this. Yesterday, we had a group of friends and we were helping them with the relationship issues. So there's no child abuse here per se, but this couple, as friends, what are friends for if you're not there to listen,
Right.
to give advice? But at the same time, what is a community for if you're not looking out for our most vulnerable ones, who are our children and our elderly people?
Right.
So our community is here. We know our community is here because we see that black person walking on the street, and yet too often we are dismissive, we mean mug, we basically look at them in terms of how high am I on the scale ladder of white success? You see what I mean? So these become problems. We have the elements here. We know more and more about our history. We know our leaders. They're right here. Like I have a painting behind me. It's symbolism, but it's symbolism that is concrete in terms of from community leaders who actually do the work. I'm not talking about community pimps who basically pimp the community to make a name for us, for themselves, and notably get fund money. I'm talking about people really doing the work. I'm talking about people who are not afraid of being black, who are not pandering to politics, to religion, to media, who have a true speech for our people. They are here. We have to reach out to them. We don't need to necessarily create a different structure. People love structures and systems, but when you are a minority that is weak in terms of your identity, in terms of your spirituality, in terms of your socioeconomics, and therefore in terms of infrastructures, by default, the dominant system will maintain its power. They will just put a black face to tell you, kumbaya.
And everything's all good. 100%. And we've seen this play out over the last 50 years, repetition over repetition. A triggering moment happens. They create stopgap programs. And then another triggering moment. No infrastructure really gets built. And like you said, we have all of the pieces that we need. So pieces individually, but it's not like an actual cohesive, I was like macro level infrastructure. I always go back to infrastructure. So that's where I feel like the resources piece is missing, because if we could organize this individual pieces and bring it together, and then when a child is born, as an entity, we could go to that parent and say, what is the plan for your child? Whatever success looks like. And now this is the ecosystem that's going to make sure that that happens. So when they have questions, they know there's somewhere to go to. Even we do those check-ins, the story that you're telling about the parents that beat the child to death and left the others to fend for themselves, if the community was checking in, I don't feel it would get to that point. You know, like we don't take it upon ourselves to say, what is happening with our neighbor? What is happening with maybe even not in the same city, but just
and this is not exclusive to black people. I just want to mention that. This is the community, the society as a whole. Please. Yes.
And that's where, and hey, if it's resources that are missing to organize ourselves, I feel like they're at all these conferences that I go to, and typically when it's like in the social realm, I'm more just listening and an observer, because I am a black father, husband with 2 children. So I want to see what are the ideas of how to make this as the best community possible. But typically I don't hear any commitments. I always hear the counterfeit yeses, like, yes, we know this is a problem. Yes, we are going to do better. Yes, we'll be more diverse and XYZ. But, and I'll use economics for an example. So the federal government, they're trying to support the black community with their Black Entrepreneurship Program. 300 million committed. And in that money, there's nothing to build infrastructure. If they took just 15 million of it and helped us create our own financial institution, and then the rest of the 285 million was housed in that bank, the leverage from that money and them being able to lend against it would have a way more profound ripple effect than just saying, here's 300 million in principle, still you have to go to the traditional banks to get the money. And when they loan out the money, the banks benefit. So what have they really built? And then when you ask the question, it's like, okay, that sounds like you guys gave us a plan, 300 million here, 30 million to phase to manage. Can we do something different with it? And their answer is no. They're like point blank, this is what the money is for. You cannot even come back with a counter offer of what would be better for the community, even though they did consultations across Canada, and in their own report, there were recommendations to use the money differently than what they had proposed, and they chose to just stick to their own agenda. So the consultations were useless because they didn't use the recommendations. It was all just symbolism for them to show that they're doing something and listening. Oh man, my fingers are gonna get tired talking about the government. So now they do all that to say, this is the way that we want you to spend the money. And I see it in the social sector, but because I'm not in it, I don't feel like I can speak to it as directly as you could, Cesar.
I just want to jump in just for a second. This is great conversation in regards to the whole issue. Should we have a system where we look after our own children?
I will say yes, and then I will go back to what Brother Ryan was saying. So, Dr. Vibe, yes, we should. But if we were to receive money from the federal or provincial governments that include establishment of infrastructures run and led by our own, what would that do? That would make us less to no subservient of the same systems of power in place. So it becomes not to the interest. This is the reason why. This is not accidental. The report itself will say the solution is for people to become self-independent in terms of having their own infrastructures that they run themselves. But in order for that to happen, you need to have a community that is strong regarding its identity. And yet we have too many Black people whose sense of value is kind of, I think Brother Ice Cube track, no Vaseline, aka the value is to be next to white people. The value is in terms of the acceptability of white people, aka to be Carlton or to be Steve Urkel and or be white passing. A lack of spirituality, aka 90+% of Black people in the world, as we live today, the studies in terms of world religions speak that 90% of Black people in the world ascribe to religions where they are seen as inferiors. God, prophet, messiahs don't look like them, aka Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism as the main three religions, and Judaism.
And religion that was given to them.
That were imposed to them.
Right.
That were imposed to them. We know very well, roots. My name is Kunta Kinte. You shall call yourself Toby. Eventually, in order to stay alive, call yourself Toby, as the woman told him. So this is the reality, but we don't have to ascribe to that. I give my conferences and trainings to senior leaders wearing my identity in full display. They understand, they know it, they're not running away, they're not thinking I'm gonna tie them to a tree and set them on fire like some Hollywood movie may have shown them about Africans eating white people. No, times have changed. We need to build our community from our own, because our failure, our ongoing failure as a group, it's not the failure of Ryan, it's not the failure of Dr. Vibe or of BI Media or of XYZ community leader out there. It's a collective failure where when you succeed as a Black person, even if you're a billionaire like Kanye West, Jay-Z, Byron Allen, or Aliko Dangote, the richest Black man in the world, you are still seen poor. Versus when you are of certain other identities as Jewish and Chinese, you can be poor, but Black people will fear you because you're Jewish, Chinese, and white people and Arab will fear, if not respect you, because they know you have the backing of a bigger and stronger community behind you. Our children and our elderly people end up being the ones suffering from our collective failure, not an individual failure.
That's a
A
strong statement.
collective failure.
I think that's a really
I
prolific
agree.
statement. I think that's
100%.
a really, nice, very good way to start off. And yes, with the Purple Day, and I agree with you, Cesar. We as a environment have to look at how we've treated our own children and how we were treated as children also, because it's systemic, and it's not systemic from the culture. It's systemic within our own.
Yes.
It's systemic within our own, not from the outsiders. So yes, there are organizations that have questionable practices like CAS towards Black children, but we have questionable practices to our own children.
Absolutely. No white person comes into a Black home and say, beat your kid. They don't. This is not slavery time. This is not 200 years ago. There comes a point we have to stop saying the white people, the Arab people, the slavery, the colonization. Absolutely, those are still impacts. Like Dr. Joy DeGrasse wrote, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Yeah. Just like Frantz Fanon wrote about the wretched of the earth and black skin, white mask. Absolutely, those are still impacts. But there comes a point of accountability in terms of saying, hey, you know what? Pops and mom treated me a certain way. I see the consequences on me. Maybe I need therapy. Maybe I need someone like Dr. Vibe, Ryan, Sister L, Sister whoever. I need Warren. Maybe I need a sister, a brother, someone who looks like me to unpack so that I can become a better human to my children.
Leslie McEwen, our own systemic problems, agreed. And Leslie, I'd love you to touch base with me because I know you're part of an organization of Black therapists. I was on their website the other day, and I would love to get a representative from that organization on Black Canada Talking as soon as possible, because there are many. I'm getting to the point in my journey that every Black person needs a therapist. I'm getting to that point. And we need the organization you're a part of, Leslie, to come on and talk about it so people across our country, Black people, need to know about this. Next comment, Sophia Jacob. Yes, it would be good to have our own infrastructure. However, we must resource it and fund it with our own dollars, or else it won't have a full say on what happens. Before this even happen, we must look in with ourselves and start a healing process. Absolutely. So, Ryan, I know you have a last comment. Yeah, you got a last comment. We'll move on to the next conversation.
Yeah. So and this comes up a lot, especially when I talk about resourcing our own infrastructure. The system that's in place right now is already funded with our dollars. So if we collectively decided that our money that we're already paying to the government through our taxes, instead of going to the current broken CAS, I'm using them as an example, we want to divert it to a new entity that is Black run, Black owned, and Black serving. So my thought process is, if we are running our entity, yes, there's going to be problems, but it's our problems to now analyze and then do better. Right now, we have a system that is external to us that has problems, and the only way we can fix it is begging them to do better. I would rather have control of our destiny to say, you know what, we're going to work through 50 years from now. It's going to be something that we can be proud of, but it's going to take time to get there and patience. We've had enough patience with the current CAS or whoever entity you want to point there. We've given them time, and they're getting our money already through the government. I say let's divert it, and hey, things can be done parallel. A lot of times you get distracted with the defund the police because of the language that they use. This is not about defunding CAS and now creating something new. It's while CAS is running, we want to also build our own thing. And I believe our thing will be better than this thing eventually, that we can just take care of our stuff ourselves. But until you give us that space, every time I talk to an MP and we get to the point where I'm asking, okay, so what dollars will you put into us building our infrastructure? Oh, we have to make sure we do it right. We don't want to give money and then something goes wrong. I was like, no. Jewish communities, you give them money, they do programs, they fall flat on their face and they get money again to try again. What are you talking about? You can't get it wrong with the Black community. give us space to fail too and learn. It's a weird dynamic the way that the government treats us.
It's part of that systemic racism, and at the same time,
yes,
when talking about accountability, and I say this very often because this is a model that I use in terms of Roots and Culture Canada as president. If Black people gave 10% of either the salary or even 10% of something that they earn, like contract, notably Black professionals, into the community organizations, they would not need to be funded from the same institutions and the same systems that do practice anti-Black racism.
Agreed.
This is what we do.
So
10%. I give 10% of my contracts go back to my organization. 10%.
Yes.
Instead of wasting it into the church, the mosque, and entertainment. I'm not bashing them. I'm just calling it what it is, because what do you think the Jewish and Chinese community they do?
All right, let's move on to our next conversation piece. And Leslie, I did get your message, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Our next, and this segues nicely into our next conversation piece, Black Canadians in the education system. So Ryan, we'll let you lead on this conversation piece. Go ahead.
And it's not because I am no expert in the education system. Actually, I would love to do a shout out to a colleague of mine, Danielle Dowdy, that's been in here, Brampton, Peel, and really fighting hard. And there's a slew of people fighting like the issues in our education system. But my observation is, the repetition. It's like the NDP, the provincial NDP, calls a town hall last week about the racist acts happening in the different school boards. I think a teacher showed up at a Halloween party in blackface. Teachers are tying up students with masking tape and putting them in the closet as punishment. So what progress have we made? And this is where I go back to talking about infrastructure for two reasons. One, if we had our own Black-led, Black-serving, Black-run school board, we would be able to have better conversations with the current school boards. Because right now, we're all just like the participants begging the masters or the powers that be to be better. And we're seeing over the last decades at least, it's not getting better. And every report that comes out says the same thing. So again, like I said, should we divert money from something that's broken to help us build our own? So that's one piece. But the other piece around infrastructure is the current system. We can't get rid of the bad players. I can't understand when a teacher cold-blooded, deliberately either acts racist or acts unethical or puts children at harm. We can't get rid of these people. And so we're really stuck with all these bad players. I just asked the question, what progress have we made? And again, could we not start building our own infrastructure so at least our parents have options and we're not just stuck with this school board, wherever you might be, TDSB, York, Peel. The stories just keep coming.
Cesar?
I would basically say that when we talk about the education system and Black Canadians, as one who is privy to giving conferences on racism in high schools, and as well who actually is an equity trainer to senior leaders in the education system, I must mention the fact that it is all part of ongoing systemic racism. I don't think I'm surprising anyone. And too often the notion, just as we were just talking in terms of CAS and having Sister Janelle becoming executive director at York, the putting of a Black face in the leadership, just as of even Black teachers, it doesn't change really the reality beyond the symbolism and the importance of representation. The issues are embedded deep in terms of the fabric of this society. I'm purposely saying something general because it's important that we remember this in terms of dismantling it. Our brother Malcolm X notably said, talked about having our children being educated by the enemy. Don't get me wrong, this was before he did his pilgrimage when he thought all white people were evil and going to hell, whatever, whatever. So I'm not here saying simply being white makes one an enemy of the black community. What we're talking about is the systems of oppression upon blacks. And as such, I go back to what Brother Ryan was saying in terms of the infrastructure, but also in terms of what I was saying in terms of the accountability of the black community. These systems will not change unless there's a power struggle that happens. And that power struggle cannot wait 2 or 3 decades when in terms of demographics, Africa becomes the most populated place in the world, and we have like 10 times more black people here. That's not what we should be waiting for. We should be active right now in ensuring that black parents attend the parents-teachers meetings. We should be active now in making sure that we do have black community organizations that attend, as Roots and Culture Canada does, that attend what happens in the school system, the school council, where our black children are present. And at the same time, black parents know there is a black community organization nearby that when there's an issue at school, you can call Cesar, you can call Ryan, you can call Dr. Vibe, you can call L, you can call XYZ person to represent you if you don't have the language, if you fear that your immigration status may be an issue, if you fear that your education level makes you intimidated to confront the school authority. Because too often, and I have to say this, not in defense of the school system, please don't get me wrong. I have to say this in terms of the reality on the ground. Very often, what happens in these cases of racism in schools are not so much necessarily that the teacher per se is racist, but the miscommunication and the misunderstanding that occur from the reality of the situations make it that it becomes a racist situation. I give a very simple example that happened in a school here in more than one school. So I'm thinking right now about an English and a French school. 2 schools, 2 high schools, one in the east, one in the west of Ottawa. So these children, they speak English, they speak French, 2 different schools, and yet very similar situation of disturbance by black students. In the English school, the teacher was white. In the French school, the teacher was black, a Haitian brother. Disturbance by the children. Mr. Cesar, me, coming to give a conference on racism, and I had a direct conversation with the children, our teenagers, in front of the white peers. And guess what happened? They were just looking for attention because they don't get valued enough academically. They don't get valued enough academically, and too often their own parents, they expect the 80, 90, A and A plus grades, but they know they're helping to the homeworks. These black children who don't know each other in 2 different parts of the city will speak French, speak English. They said the same thing. The conference on racism had a 30 minutes conversation. Them, me, and the white students listening in shock. Why? Because therefore they were just stupid. Therefore they were just trying to be funny. Therefore they were just acting like some rapper or whatever, some athlete. And they suddenly had this vision into too many black homes where our children become victims of racism. And I don't want to necessarily say everything is because of the black parents. No. But our children become victims of racism because too often our black parents are missing at the table, are missing in advocating for the children, are missing in bringing along that black community leader that can give them voice, that can stand up for them. I've had, in giving conferences on racism to our children, I've had black teenagers, 12 to 19 years old, cry at the powerlessness of their parents in light of situations of racism that they go through in schools. I'm being very serious. It becomes a problem. These schools are systemically designed not for our children. 1983, last segregated school in Canada, 1983. This is not in black and white. This is not somewhere in the USA with the transportation and Joe Biden signing here or there. No, this is right here in Canada, 1983, a year before Trailer. So this is a matter of system, but we need to have our people represent. I cannot be here giving this lecture regarding racism in the education system, addressing the fact that it's not enough to put a black face as a principal, as a teacher, or even on the school council board, whatever, and myself become a parent who is not present at the parent-teacher meetings. I'm already advocating for our children. I'm advocating for our families. I do get calls. I get calls from last week, a black Somali veiled woman calling me to step up to advocate for her disabled child in a situation that's been going on for 3 years.
And it was such an important point that you mentioned around the parents having an entity to be able to call, to just give them leverage, give them the right terminology, the language, because when the parent feels powerless, that now because the child is looking at their parents like they're superheroes. Yet dealing with the school, you see your parent like just freeze up and not even listen to you or not even believe you in what you're saying because they're taking the teacher's side. So many dynamics, and a lot of times if they had a bit of it's almost like not an army, but ammunition to use. It's like, listen, I can call and what triggered in my mind, I remember hearing about an organization, I believe they're in Hamilton, that and it's for autistic children. So if there's an issue with the autistic child, the school does not call the parent to come in and try to figure out what's going on. They call this organization, and the organization comes and sees it because they're like behavioral therapists. So they see if they can work with the child and get them to, calm down and get back to school. But for us in our community, if we get that call and we have to leave work, then we come in, we don't know what to do because the child something happened and you don't know. And as a parent, you just feel like, I'm failing my child. I don't know what to do. So you take them home. Now you have to stay home. The ripple effect just becomes too much to handle. But that idea of where you're talking about having that entity to be able to call goes back to that infrastructure where like the first responses in our community are missing. And I feel like if we could build those, even if they start small, like you said, if it's me, if it's Dr. Vibe, if it's you, just a couple people to be on call for certain things, that I feel like would go a long way. And yeah, to be a part of something like that would be amazing.
Allow me to add something very important, Brother Ryan and Dr. Vibe. In terms of the pervasiveness of racism in the education system, it's very important for our listeners to understand this. And I'm speaking here in terms of real case scenarios. So now we understand there is the link in terms of the school to prison pipeline. But there is another link that we must understand. And it doesn't have to be the only example, but it's a classic example of the Caribbean or African migrant who comes to Canada, the US, UK, or France. They're not fluent in English or French in terms of as it's spoken here. The child growing up here becomes more fluent or even born here. In some cases, the child becomes a translator to the parent. When a case of racism occurs, the powerlessness of the parents, who, let's be fair, our Black parents very often are in survival mode. They're trying to survive the system. But one of the things that happen in terms of the pervasiveness of racism, notably in the education sector, so we have to understand, adults go to work, children go to school. That's like kind of the work area. There becomes often a disintegration of respect and value in the relationship between parent and child, because some of our children, not all, some of our children, in seeing the powerlessness of the parent, come to become convinced. School is useless. My parents don't have my back. They can't protect me. Right. Why am I even trying to succeed when they keep reminding me that I'm only good at becoming some musician, athlete, or go do some some low-paying job. The sense of value in terms of the destruction of the psycho-emotional well-being of the Black child, in terms of things that they can't understand. We're talking about children, but notably teenagers who don't have all the context, all the ramifications to understand. Your parent is not abandoning you. Your parent may come from a country where, hey, the teacher has all the authority, and whoa, you're telling me a white teacher, of course they must be right. How can a white teacher possibly be wrong? You know, we're coming from colonial systems where, well, I mean, you know, the Mr. Smith or Madame Julie, of course they're right. Like, you know, I'm not going to school. I don't need to go to advocate for you. You're wrong. We need to change these type of patterns of thinking because it destroys our youth and it destroys our young adults in terms of them not valuing the education when they see too often the plight that occurs.
Ryan, anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, yeah, I just wanted to get that off my chest.
No
I appreciate the conversation. But yeah, I feel like, hey, if the next Black Canada Talking, you can bring somebody that has a bit more expertise to replace me to talk about education and be with Cesar, I'd be happy to listen and just see what puzzle piece I play that I can support what needs to be done in the education system. You know?
I think just to close this part of the conversation, I think you mentioned at the beginning Daniel Dowdy. We need more Daniel Dowdys.
100%.
And
yes.
we also need our environment, whether you have children or not, to get some skin in the game.
Very true.
You know, like showing up at the PTA meetings, because things can't be so good that parents aren't showing up at PTA meetings. Unless you're living, you know, you're in a good situation, which I know many Black parents are not when it comes to their education systems. But again, it takes the collaboration.
And I've seen at the PTA, because I'm on the parent council with Danielle at our school, and the recommendations that are made that get implemented that impact the children happen because of a meeting where I witnessed it. I'm like, so if she wasn't there to make that recommendation, it doesn't happen. So this is what parents need to understand. We have to be in the room to influence what's happening in the system. It's like we can't just dismiss it and hope everything works out.
It's like one of the things I used to say a lot. I don't say as much anymore. You're either at the table or on the table.
Right. Or I heard like on the menu.
Or on the menu, right?
At the table, yes.
So this is the thing. So after you get at the table, then your next step is to build your own table.
And that's where my mind is there. It's like, what can we build parallel that becomes an option? A lot of times we don't have alternatives, so we're stuck with what we have.
No, you know what? We have alternatives, but we don't dream big. We don't think it's possible. Like, we don't think we're big. Again, we have this trauma inside of saying, oh, the only way it can be done is with someone else's help. We have that trauma side into us over these colonial years that only we can't do it ourselves because they got to do it. No, break that totally chain.
False.
Like, you know, we just gone through 16 to 18 months where there was homeschooling.
Yes, right.
Right. And I know many of Black parents saying, you know what? I'm taking my child or children out of the system and I'm going to do it myself.
I hear that.
So we will move on. So
just very quickly in 30 seconds. So, Luke, I'd like for Luke to share in a moment the video that I shared. This is a video that I use in training to senior leaders in the education sectors, but as well to senior leaders in all sectors. Actually, November 2nd, senior leaders in the government, municipal, hospital, prison, child welfare, drugs and addiction. The video, look, please, if you can share it. I want our Black people to see this. It won't surprise them, but I need for our Black people to see this video. It's on YouTube. I think it's okay for me to share it. I mean, it's YouTube, so anyone can see it. YouTube are hidden biases, and it focuses on a Black family. It's a short minute video that I use notably on racism, um, on my conferences and presentations, trainings on racism, equity, diversity, inclusivity, and notably unconscious bias. It's important that we see it because this is not just a matter of speaking of racism. It's not just a matter of speaking of Black people. It's a matter of speaking of systems through different sectors, how they impact the individual and the collective. If we talk about, for example, police brutality, as Black people, and notably Black men, we know it. Anytime we get pulled over, we could be the next George Floyd. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. And just before we move on to our last subject, Sophia Jacobs saying, yet we have yet to see Black history and culture curriculum to be part of everyday learning and education system throughout Canada. Well, it'll be interesting because, and we won't get into this deep, but there were some elections last week in the United States. And particularly there was an election in the state of Virginia. And one of the hot issues there was what was being taught to children in the education system there. And there is many a person who is non-melanated who does not feel that slavery should be taught to children in the school system. So do mark my words, people, maybe I'm crazy, but I wouldn't be surprised one day that something like that comes up here. People saying, no, we should not teach how Indigenous, well, it's not taught here, how Indigenous people have been treated really in public schools. Mm-hmm. So before even Black people's history gets taught, if an Indigenous aren't, you're not seeing Black people before the Indigenous. So I hear you, Sophia, but I think let's be wary. We hope that mindset doesn't come up across.
Let me shock you, Dr. Vibe. There is a school council in Texas where in the education history manuals for all children, I think in elementary, but also high schools, slavery, basically Africans kidnapped into slavery, was replaced by workers.
I know. I saw the story.
There you go. That gives you an example. And in Virginia, what you end up having is a conversation on critical race theory.
Oh, yes.
Where basically you end up having, especially white conservatives. It's not only white conservatives who are racist. There are white liberals who are racist, many of them, of course, but especially white conservatives will criticize the notion of critical race theory because it dares to bring truth to the history of what has happened factually.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's move for our last conversation piece. So our last one is we're broadcasting live on November 7th and November 11th. In Canada is Remembrance Day. So any thoughts in regards to Remembrance Day? I know, Cesar, you want to talk about Black soldiers.
I just really wanted to, as November 11th is happening this coming week, I just wanted to remind our Black people, but really all people, that Remembrance Day is not just a white thing. Remembrance Day, here in Ottawa, and I don't know, in other parts of Canada, they will lower the flag regarding Indigenous Remembrance Day. But at the same time, we must never forget that Black people have been fighting in World War I as World War II, and they were also present in the Korean War and other wars, aka white wars. We must not forget, if I take the example of World War I and World War II, that Africans, but also Caribbeans, were enlisted in force. In Africa, a common tactic to bring in Black soldiers was the threat of setting fire to the village, raping your mother, your wife, your sister, threatening to kill your father. When there is an expression in French called les tirailleurs sénégalais, basically the Senegalese shooters, if you want, it wasn't exclusive to Senegalese people. We must not forget that one of the things that colonization did, if I take the example of Nigeria and Ghana, was to take Black troops from one part of the land to use them to fight and kill Black people in another part of the land to bring them all under control of the same white administration. We must not forget that it is black people who greatly contributed to the liberation of South of France, and yet that is forgotten. That black people, uh, an entire regiment of black soldiers were killed by the Nazis as cities were captured. In the Holocaust, the concentration camps, black soldiers, along a few black people, such as in Germany, were killed. The French writer Serge Billet wrote about it, Noirs dans les camps nazis, blacks in the Nazi camps. But we must also not forget that when liberation came, and I'm thinking here notably of the liberation of Paris, black soldiers who had fought from the south of France all the way to Paris to liberate Paris, they were denied to be on the Champs-Élysées. They were denied to be part of the parade. They were basically asked to hide, to not show their face. We must not forget the sacrifices of so many of our black people who went to fight hoping for a better life. And too often, as was the case in Tulsa, they came back to more segregation. They came back to lynching. They came back to see the communities such as Black Wall Street burned down, sometimes even air bombed. They came back to sundown towns. They came back to wives, sisters, daughters being raped. They came back to Africa to more colonization. I'm thinking about the camp of Tiroy, 1944 in Senegal, where black soldiers who had fought valiantly, by all reports in Europe, coming back home, they asked for the fair pay. They got paid, yes, but they asked for the fair pay as the white counterparts who were in the same battles, and they got killed, and they didn't get compensation nor apologies decades later. I don't wear this poppy as just someone else wearing a poppy because it's Remembrance Day. I wear this poppy with a center that's black because too many of our black soldiers, behind each of that black soldier is a black family. It's a black community that is not being remembered, that is not being addressed. And our children, they're lucky if they even hear about this during Black History Month, but they should never be waiting for Black History Month to hear about this. So I just wanted to make sure that we talk about it because too often those brothers, and let's also mention of sisters who are also in the background, notably as nurses, they basically were fighting white/European wars for people who still saw them as inferiors. Thank you.
Ryan, anything you want to add on to that, sir?
Nothing specific. That I just second everything that Cesar just said. I feel like it was put exactly how we need to hear it. And the only piece I would add is now when we talk about infrastructure, who's in charge of making sure we know this history? I will shout out Black, oh my gosh.
Ontario?
No, Black History Society of Ontario.
Ontario
Yes.
Black History Society.
We should now be able to go to that website during November 11th this week and see that history. So if it's not happening there, it has to happen somewhere. Cesar, you might be the one to have to build the website, but this is information that I didn't know, and I feel like I would want to learn more. So whoever's in charge of getting this information to the community, get to work.
If you don't mind me, Ryan, I'll actually prove to you how right you are. As too often things that relate to Black consciousness and notably Black history, it's not the fault of the individual in terms of saying you didn't know. Ryan, you're an intelligent brother, you're an involved brother, you're a dedicated father. Your ignorance is not that you're ignorant. Your ignorance is a reflection of the community, the collective as a whole, such as too often happening when we talk about history, but also politics, geopolitics, especially religion, etc., etc. To give you a perfect example, America has commemorated, and it wasn't just America, they commemorated recently the passing of General Colin Powell. The black man's first black what was it, U.S. Secretary of Defense, etc., etc., etc. But are they going to commemorate all the black soldiers that died for him to get there? Are they going to commemorate?
Exactly.
You see what? But you see what I mean? That's exactly it. It's like George Floyd is a tree that hides the forest of black men, women, and children victims of police brutality. Colin Powell is a celebrated figure in terms of the black soldier hiding so many figures of black people, black Americans, black Canadians, black Caribbeans. I mean, do we want to talk about the thousands and thousands of black Brazilians that have been killed in wars against Argentina? Do we want to talk about it? Like, look at the soccer team. Argentina is the only country in the Americas that does not have a black soccer player. There's a reason. It's in the history. Nobody ever thinks of that. So our ignorance is used against us to continue our oppression. When Colin Powell, we can talk about him being a war criminal, whatever. General Colin Powell, rightfully is commemorated, but he is the tree that hides the death of so many African American soldiers, black Canadian soldiers, black Caribbean, black South Americans, especially African soldiers forced into white European wars where they were still seen as inferiors and went back home to suffer slavery since 1776 because there were blacks in that war, 1812. World War I, World War II, and so many other conflicts. If I can just give just one little piece of information, it's the last one, but I think it's so important. I think my brothers and sisters, some of you have seen that movie about Nate Turner. I don't remember the title of the movie, but there was a movie about Nate Turner. But I don't think a lot of people understood what happened at the end of the movie. At the end of the movie, Nate Turner got hanged, for starting that rebellion. And then the children will basically saw him hanged. So the children for whom he was fighting for them to be free were adults in the liberated, in the non-slavery USA after 1865. Some of them, notably black men in terms of a better life, became soldiers of the United States Army. There was a conflict the United States entered, the American-Spanish War. In the American-Spanish War, and this is documented. This is what I do. This is why I give conferences and trainings. In the American-Spanish War, there was a chapter, a very small chapter that is not often talked about. What happened to these children who became adults? Children born under slavery who became adult in the post-slavery USA, members of the U.S. Army, fighting on the U.S. side against the Spanish War, so two white powers, and they were sent to the Philippines. The Philippines at the end of the 19th century did not look like the Philippines you see today, my friends. These black soldiers had a shock. What was the shock? The indigenous people they were sent to fight against, to kill, to arrest, and to jail for white power very often were darker than they were. It traumatized and it shocked them. Bob Marley notably commemorated that in, I think, Buffalo Soldier, where it's notably linked in terms of this American-Spanish War and the black experience in that war. Children born under slavery becoming adults in post-slavery USA, serving in the U.S. Army, sent to the Philippines, and the shock of serving a white power nation to kill black people.
That was summed up a little bit, kind of with the Muhammad Ali, him pushing back against, why are you sending me to kill these people when you guys are the ones like really fighting against me? But
Excellent.
yeah, that, man, I did not know that part of it. So things to look up. And is there a YouTube video about that too? I saw you put the one. Do you know if that's documented somewhere?
I'm sure it is, what his resistance. And a lot of people said professionally as a boxer, he was robbed the best years of life, but he didn't care about that. He said, why are you, I don't have any war against the Viet Cong. That's exactly what he said. I have no war against these people. They didn't do nothing wrong to me.
That's what I wonder, if that shock was they see people that look like them, but then they're sent there to kill them. Like, why am I killing my brethren? Like something, your mind just will like, yeah, that's insane.
It can add to trauma.
100%.
It can add to trauma. Well, gentlemen, rocked it out of the house today. I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time. As always, Ryan, how can people get a hold of you? Best way.
Go to our website, acbncanada.com. If you need support with your business, we are happy to fill out our form to let us know what you need, and then we will call you within 48 hours to have a conversation and see how best we can support. And if you want to get in contact with me directly, 647-225-3309. Add me to WhatsApp, send me a message, and we shall chat.
Wonderful. Cesar?
Thank you, Dr. Vibe. Thank you, Brother Ryan. Thank you, BIA Media. You can reach me, rootsandculturecanada.com, and even better, on Facebook. Yes, I survived, and I fought another block by some Arab religious extremists. I have to mention it. But yes, you can find me on Facebook, Cesar Remy, R-I-M-Y, Emery Ndema-Moussa. I'm the only one.
All right. I'd like to say thank you to both of you. Thank you, everyone who watched the conversation live or on replay, mentioning Leslie, Sophia, and others. Thank you. If I did mention you, it's your head, my head, not my heart. All right. So thank you so much for supporting as always. As always, I end off these conversations with this: live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get small to get stronger. Block assumptions, then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Love, faith, and respect. And remember to give yourselves grace. Next week on Black Canada Talking, scheduled, is the Deputy Mayor of Shelburne, Ontario, Steve Anderson. Has written a great book about his life story and journey. So please come by and check it out. And please follow the Dr. Vibe Show, whether on Facebook or on YouTube. We finally hit over 700 YouTube subscribers. So that's a huge accomplishment, but we want to get the message out to more and more people. And one of the advantages when you subscribe to me, either on Facebook or on YouTube, you get notified when the next upcoming epic conversation is being held. I'd like to say thank you also to BIA Media for the great production. God bless. Peace to all. Keep the faith and walk good.